Shh, shh. Do you hear that? The pop of the mitt in the Sloan Park backfields. You smell that? It's a grilled hot dog. Baseball is in the air. Spring training is upon us. Oh, not really. We're just pretending. But we have fake headlines. Locked On Cubs Monday edition comes at you now.
You are Locked On Cubs, your daily Chicago Cubs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Cubs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hello, good morning, happy Monday. Welcome on in. I'm your host, Andrew Bellison. For those of you that don't know me by now, shame on you. I'm just kidding, but I served as the public address announcer at Wrigley Field for 10 seasons. That's right, that was me. Now batting number 17, Chris Bryant. And now I am so fortunate and so thankful and so lucky to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network and part of the Locked On family with you. I want to thank you for taking the time each and every morning for making us your first listen of the day. Find us wherever you source your favorite casts. We're free and available on all platforms. Additionally, I want to take a quick second to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Check us out on social media. Love interacting with you guys on Twitter. At Chicago Cubs PA is my personal handle. At Locked On Cubs, the show's handle. Also, check out our YouTube page. It's new. It's fun. Great content there. You can watch the show if you'd rather than listen, or both. I'm okay if you do both. Check us out. Locked On Cubs YouTube. We're in the Locked On Cubs studio here. We've got Arnold Palmer Invitational replays on the TV from Bay Hill. Happy Monday to you. The Cubs were a bad team defensively in 2021, right? Well, not so fast. They may be better than you think in 2022 defensively. We're going to see how they stack up on defense with the leather compared to the rest of the clubs in the National League Central. Also, does the Professor Kyle Hendricks, one of my faves, carry any fantasy value for you as we head into 2022? Maybe, maybe not. But first, like I said in the open, do you smell the grilled dogs? You hear the pop of the mitt on the leather? The sun is beating down on your face from the desert sky. Spring training's in the air, but it's not because we're locked out. But we're pretending. So it's time for more fake spring training headlines. That's right. We dive into the Cactus and Grapefruit League action as if it were continuing as it should be, and analyze some headlines that we would surely see pop up if we had gotten underway on time as planned. We've already discussed some of these fake headlines that have been made up. An extension contract-wise for Wilson Contreras. Brennan Davis chatter. When will we see him in the big leagues? How is the back end of the Cubs rotation shaping up behind Kyle Hendricks and Marcus Stroman and Wade Miley? Today, we talk depth. What? You're not excited? In my opinion, one of the most underrated pieces of a strong ball club. Do you feel me on this one? Look at the World Series teams, winner or loser, just those who have made the playoffs and or World Series over the last 20 plus years. They all have had or have good depth in the bullpen, off the bench, et cetera, et cetera. So today's headline, out of Mesa, Arizona, if it were spring training as normal, Cubs depth and David Ross. So here's the skinny. The Cubs front office and Ross both kind of analyzed what the Giants did last year and were very intrigued. And let's be honest, rightfully so. You scratch your head, say, what did the Giants do besides win 14 million games last year when nobody expected them to? Exactly. You answered my question. Giants came into the year last year projected to be around 500, 80, 82 win ball club. Ended up winning 107 games and losing a heartbreaking division series to the Dodgers. How the hell did they do this, you ask yourself? Couple things. One, their offense was built around bounce back seasons from vets and a mix and match group of players who rarely played on a daily basis. Don't you just, first, time out. Don't you just love groups that come together like that? That's one of the reasons I have such a soft spot for like the 98 Cubs wildcard team. I was 11 years old, diehard Cubs fan as a kid. But for that exact reason, this kind of like mishmash, misfit group that just wins. You just got to love that. Getting back to the plot here. When Ross first took the job with the Cubs, he talked about wanting to have a regular lineup and giving his players consistency, something that Joe Maddon was criticized often for before Ross took over for not doing. Not only has he learned on the job and adjusted the thinking, but he's also working with a very different roster than the one he inherited in 2020. So, like any good manager, he adapts as things change. Locked On Cubs fam, let me ask you this. Would it make sense to get Patrick Wisdom in the lineup against pitchers who can't throw fastballs well up in the zone? Rafael Ortega had a 139 WRC plus against right-handers, couldn't hit left-handers, had no extra base hits against left-handers all of last year. Can he platoon with someone like Michael Hermosillo or Harold Ramirez in center? Yes, yes, yes. Rafael had no extra base hits against left-handers last year. 0. Whoa. You don't think that's part of the plan, is to get him his ABs against those guys that are going to let him succeed? Let me ask you another question. Can the Cubs and David Ross help Clint Frazier find the best version of himself, the version that we all still hope he can be, the version that we all thought he could be when he was drafted before the injuries and the concussion issues? Yes, and they will. If they do, it could make sense, just throwing this out there, to play him in left field on days when Ian Happ, assuming that's Happ's regular spot, faces a bad matchup. In right against lefties for Hayward to spot him, perhaps a little bit of DH, which is that luxury now that you have coming to the National League. Then you're helping your regulars there too. This is twofold, while also getting a guy like Frazier, or getting a guy like Ortega, or getting a guy like Hermosillo, or getting a guy like Harold Ramirez, et cetera, the ABs that they also need throughout the season. Here's the bottom line on Cubs depth and depth in general. There will need to be more additions, particularly in the infield, to really pull this off. And we kind of expect that, depending on how long this lockout drags out and how quickly and frivolously teams spend when the offseason starts again or resumes. The Cubs likely to need to find someone to at least share time at short with Horner. Now, it's potential that they make a splish splash and bring in a Correa, or bring in a bona fide, legitimate, and I like Horner at short, I'm not saying that, but a bona fide established shortstop to slot into that position. And if that's the case, this is something that we've discussed at great length here on Locked On Cubs, but if that's the case, then Horner can play elsewhere. He plays multiple positions. On top of that, the designated hitter adds another wrinkle to this experiment. So on top of bringing in other talent from outside, which we do still expect to some degree the Cubs to do when things resume again, the DH adds another element. Takes a lot of buying to get this to go. Moving parts on a daily basis. It's not the old school 25 years ago. Here's the lineup 6 out of 7 days a week. You know it. You don't even need to post it. Not an easy formula to execute necessarily because of the moving parts. I have no question Ross is a guy that can get that done with the trust of his players and having them buy in to do so. The depth is there. I think there's a few pieces that will still be added. That only adds to it. I also think that depth in the bench, in the bullpen, is literally the most underrated thing or aspect of good competitive baseball teams. We've seen it. History has told us that depth. Those that can keep scraping seem to have the most success. Kyle Hendricks had a rough 2021 season, to say the least. Does he still carry some fantasy value for you, the fantasy baseball player in 2022? We dissect that coming up here shortly. Before we do, I know you know that football season is done, but basketball is in full steam for both the pros and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fire coach is going to get hired, betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news all season long. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, much, much more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. Locked On Cubs rolls on next. Welcome back in, Locked On Family. I'm your host, Andrew Bellison. Thank you for taking the time each and every morning for making Locked On Cubs your first listen of the day. Locked On MLB Prospects, host Lindsey Crosby, is a prospect encyclopedia. And if you're interested in your clubs or others, minor league talent, he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. Free and available wherever you get your podcast, just like Locked On Cubs. So check it out. Happy Monday to you. How was your weekend? I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Enjoyed some golf, Arnold Palmer Invitational, one of my favorite tournaments of the year. Enjoyed some college hoops as well. Great to have you along with us here today. Let's get to Kyle Hendricks, the professor. Mr. Boring, right? In a good way. One of my faves to watch pitch, as crafty and as artful on the mound as they come. Is he a usable fantasy arm still? Mr. Boring and consistent was unfortunately just boring and inconsistent in 2021. And we all felt for Kyle because I think we all feel the same way about him. We love what he means to the Cubs organization. Prior to last year, I'll paint a really rosy picture for you. He had 5 straight years with an ERA below 3.5 and a WHIP below 120. Last year, totally different story. ERA ballooned to 4.77, 135 WHIP. Both of those were career worst marks by a decent margin. On top of that, as you dig deeper into the numbers, his strikeout rate, which was always essentially below average, 20 to 22%, even in the good times, dropped all the way down to 16.7%. That was actually good for 10th worst mark among the 129 pitchers with 100-plus innings in 2021 that qualified for that statistic. So ugly news for fantasy owners, right? I want to help you help your fantasy club, and that's not good. We put up with the mediocre strikeout rates before 2021 since it always came with plenty of other good ratios, plenty of innings. Get this. This is a feather in his cap, to say the least. Kyle Hendricks ranks 4th in innings pitched since the start of 2015. That's insane. I mean, in today's day and age, when starting pitchers don't last deep into ball games, he is 4th in innings pitched since 2015. Get this list. He trails only these other guys: Max Scherzer, Zach Greinke, Garrett Cole, Kyle Hendricks. That is impressive. But now, or at least in 2021, that the ratios weren't there, is Hendricks even worth drafting in 2020-22 for your fantasy club? Let's take a deeper look. When we dig into his 2021 performance, we don't find a whole lot to give you confidence in drafting him in 2022. The whiff rates on 3 of his 4 pitches decreased, and all 4 offerings registered an XBA of 259 or higher, meaning 259 average on batted balls or higher. Positive note alert. Not all doom and gloom. Hendricks did limit hard contact well last year with an 86.3 mile per hour average exit velocity allowed. That's good. However, that doesn't matter a whole lot when you serve up 31 home runs and 32 starts. Very un-Kyle Hendricks-esque. More bad news? Okay, let me give it to you. Only Jordan Lyles, Patrick Corbin, and Robbie Ray allowed more home runs in 2021. And no one allowed more hits than Kyle Hendricks did. That to me is something that could be overblown. And let me repeat that. Nobody allowed more hits than Kyle Hendricks did. However, he always lives around the plate. And with his lack of velocity, if he is just a smidge off on command or control, balls are going to get hit. So the home run thing, while you don't love it, it does make sense. Giving up the most hits also makes sense. He lives around the plate. He does not walk anybody. So with that said, that could be the byproduct of that. So don't overreact completely yet. I'm still willing to roll the dice on Hendricks if it's me. Late round flyer. Look at the track record before last year. So good. Given the profile and the deeper numbers that we just threw at you from last year, not a ton to be excited about. Maybe. Is this a total bummer? To a certain extent, as I just touched on, these pitchers that rely on command, control, and movement, and not a lot of oomph, surely have less wiggle room for success than someone throwing 105 miles an hour, right? This is not to say that a major league hitter is not going to catch up to a 105-mile-an-hour fastball. However, on the whole, those that can't rely on that have a slimmer margin for error. With that said, can't we expect a little bit of improvement from the body of work we saw from him in 2021, given his track record in the several years before that? Yes. And here's why. He now has more help at the top of the rotation. Kyle Hendricks, Marcus Stroman, Wade Miley, something he did not have last year. That rotation for the Cubs last year was awful. It's a three-headed monster on top now. We've talked about it at length here on Locked On Cubs. The back end ain't too bad either. A lot of arms you can slot in there that I think you're going to be surprised about. Number two, let's be honest. Better defense on paper, assuming there's more additions up the middle. But I like Horner and Madrigal up the middle. I do. I think that's a solid combo. There might be another shortstop addition. Hendricks needs the defensive support. Stroman is a ground ball machine. So an improved defense, clearly going to help any arm on the bump. Let's be honest. Age aside, 2021's numbers were so far off from his norm for the 5 or 6 years before that. Some positive bounce back is almost inevitable, is it not? I don't think this is glass half full. This is just kind of saying, hey, let's even things out a little bit. From a baseball perspective, Cubs fans need him, obviously. Fantasy-wise, might be a hard pass, but a guy who could get off to a hot start, and you might pick him up later on in the season, depending on how things go, but not waste a draft pick with him. Keep an eye on it. I think there's still intrigue there despite the horrendous 2021. Defense wins championships, right? So how do the Cubs look on paper in 2022 in terms of the leather? We take a look at that coming up in a minute. Before we do, it's resolution season, or I should say the time that resolutions seem to fly out the window. Have you given up on yours? If you've incorporated Built Bar into your food routine, there's a good chance that you haven't. Have you tried the new Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars, and they're all pretty darn good. Puffs are a favorite with some awesome flavors. Cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. That is awesome. All Built Bars covered in 100% real chocolate. Yep, Puffs included. That's right, 100% real chocolate. They're low cal, they're high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. Do your body a favor. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. Most Built Bars, just 130. Do me a favor. Take advantage of Locked On special offer. Go to Built.com to order some Built Bars for you today. Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15. Get 15% off your order. LOCKED15, promo code at Built.com. I promise you'll love them. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's impossible for your local auto chain or parts store to stock every part that you need for your car or truck. So save time and money. Do it yourself, use Rock Auto. Why spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts at the dealership or at the auto parts store when you can get them right online? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers just like us for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything that you could want or need for your car. Brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. We encourage you to check them out today because I know they're going to have what you want, and I know it's going to be cheaper than you can find anywhere else. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Locked On Cubs continues shortly. Welcome back, Locked On fam. Happy Monday to you. Welcome to the Locked On Studios, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every day, lockout or no lockout. We got Arnold Palmer replays here on the Golf Channel in the background. So happy to be with you. Check us out on YouTube if you would. Our YouTube page has some great content. You can watch the show as well. And we really appreciate every download that you give us because I just love spending the morning with you. I really do, from the bottom of my heart. I'm Andrew Bellison, your host. Thanks for joining us at Chicago Cubs PA on Twitter, at Locked On Cubs. So we're kind of in the middle of like a 6-part series. And what we're doing is we're ranking the Cubs in the division or seeing how they stack up in the division against the other clubs in terms of the manager and the lineup and the starting rotation, the bullpen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Today, it's time to flash the leather. We want to take a look at the defense. First, let's dive into the rest of the division. Brewers, Cardinals, probably top of the pack in defensive runs saved. Well, they were top of the pack in defensive runs saved last year. So typical of the Cardinals, right? Just playing the game the right way, nothing flashy necessarily. We would expect that to continue again in 2022. As a matter of fact, in 21, Milwaukee and St. Louis were 2nd and 5th, respectively, as a matter of fact, in all of baseball in defensive runs saved. So pretty impressive, and, no fluke as to how they finished the season because of that. Where did the Cubs rank in this category, you ask yourself? Well, it's a great question. Higher than you may have realized. They were actually 13th overall in 2021 in defensive runs saved, or middle of the pack in terms of the entire Major League Baseball. As for the Reds and Pirates, bottom third of all the baseball for both of them. So that leads us to a really interesting question in terms of defense and approach for the Cubs in 2022 and what route they will go if they don't upgrade at all from where they stand right now, or if they do, I suppose, up the middle at the shortstop position or elsewhere. What about the shift? Like it? Love it? Hate it? I don't know. I'm curious as to where you're at on that. Let me know on Twitter what you think of the shift. I heard Mark Grace once say if they would have shifted him in the 90s like they do today, he would have hit 500. And I think Wade Boggs probably would have been in that same category. We should ask Wade. I'd love to hear his answer on that. Ross did something very different in 2021 in terms of defense. What's that, you ask yourself? Well, he shifted even more against lefties, up from 51% in 20 to over 60% of the time in 2021, while reducing shifting against right-handed batters down from 21.5% in 2020 to under 14% in 2021. So what, you ask yourself? People shift against left-handers seemingly more often than righties anyways, right? Whether this caused the relative improvement in shift performance for the Cubs in 2021 overall is essentially unclear, but it does correlate with the improvement to a degree. Note that the word relative is doing a lot of work in that last sentence. The Cubs were pretty bad last year, no matter where they put their fielders, weren't they? We've preached about improving up the middle, especially with Stroman leading the way, 57% ground ball rate. He is a ground ball machine. And overall, the Cubs have a worm-burning staff. They were 4th last year in ground ball percentage overall at 45% without Stroman. So strength up the middle, infield-wise, is more important than you can even realize. Take a look at Wade Miley, career grounder rate of 48.4%, while, like I said, Stroman's career-wise, over 57%. Amazing. Infield defense will matter more to the Cubs this season than almost any other team in the major leagues. So, in terms of where they rank in the division defensively and how they implement the shift to help that will be very, very interesting moving forward. Will David Ross stick with those ratios and percentages that he used last year compared to 2020? Listen, you can put guys wherever you want. If you don't have the best defensive team, it doesn't always matter where they are. Obviously, you want to be in position, but better defensive teams, shift or no shift, throughout the course of 162 games are just flat out going to perform better, period. That's just common sense. Where does that leave us? We expect David Ross to continue to experiment, assuming the shift is not banned from the game. And while I don't love the shift, banning it from the game just strips a level of strategy away from it that I don't think is fair to do, but that's for another episode. Last year's approach of playing mostly normal against righties and mostly shifted against lefties would probably be a good place to start because the approach seemed to show some promise compared to the year before. Some early struggles wouldn't be all that surprising, right? I mean, the assumed starting infield of Wisdom, Horner, Madrigal, and Schwindel from third to first has played 0 innings together as a group. That's right, 0. So it takes some time to gain some familiarity. I mean, that's just how it goes. All of this, as well, as I touched on, hinges on a shortstop addition to split time or slot Horner to another position. So that all remains to be seen. So we shall see. Work in progress? Maybe. Improved? Maybe. Better last year with the leather than we realized? Yes. I say middle of the pack for the Cubs defensively, barring a major addition here when the offseason begins again. Anything better would be a plus, but they were better last year than we gave them credit for. So, middle of the pack we'll stick with, but that could change. Thank you for joining us again today, and thank you for making Locked On Cubs your first listen each and every morning. We ask that you make Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Selly, your host, brings you his unique perspective on the Major League past and present. Make them your second listen of the day. It's free and available, just like Locked On Cubs, wherever you get your favorite cast. We'll talk later in the week, more Cubs-related fantasy, more fake spring training headlines. We've got some great interviews penciled in as well. This has been Locked On Cubs. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop by with us. I'm Andrew Bellison. We'll see you next time.